Good morning Year 6. I hope that you're all okay and enjoying the sunshine today. In the email that I sent my class this week, I recommended some books that I've recently read that I've really enjoyed. They're all children's books and they're all ones that I've downloaded onto my Kindle. And what I thought I'd do today is I thought I would share one of my favourite authors with you. So that's Michael Morpurgo, and I'm going to read part of Billy the Kid to you today. It's a bit of a tricky one. The book isn't split into chapters. So what I'll do is I'll aim to read for about 10 to 15 minutes each time. So each video you will hear part of the book, and then when I film the next bit I'll just go from wherever we left off. So Billy the Kid is set in World War II, and it follows the life of a kid called Billy, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I have. I shouldn't be here really, not by rights. I should have been pushing up the daisies a long time ago, but I'm not. I'm here, and I'm 80 years old today. One way or another, I've been lucky. I've got my eyes, my ears, all right, they might be a bit on the fuzzy side, but they work, and I can think straight for most of the time. Of course, the old knee gives me a lot of grief, but it always has done, ever since the war anyway, and I'm used to it now. I can't complain, not on a lovely day like this. It's the 10th of April, and I'm sitting on my favourite park bench, under my favourite tree. It's a great spreading chestnut tree. And the bees are out. Lovely. I've got a picnic on my lap and there's a bunch of kids playing football, so what more could I want? One of them's good too. Skinny, like I was, a bit scrawny, little bandy legs, but he leaves them all standing, like I did, once. I think the boys are going to put on a bit of a birthday party for me tonight. I've got to be back by 6 at the latest. That's what they said. I'll do my best, but it's Chelsea against Liverpool, and I'm not missing a single minute of that, party or no party. I couldn't sleep last night. I never can before match days. I get too wound up. I've always been like it. It's only a game of football, Billy. That's what the boys keep telling me. But it's more than that. A lot more. I know I should have given up by now, but I haven't. When it comes to football, I'm like a little kid. Like those kids over there in the park. The same park that I scored my very first goal in. That would be well over 70 years ago now. Back then, Dad sometimes got tired in the afternoons and had to go and lie down, and then I'd practice by myself up against the brick wall with both feet. Dad always made me practice with both feet. He told me 2 things that I've never forgotten. That if I wanted it badly enough, I could be the best footballer in the land, and that I must never go fighting in a war, any war. I tried to do what he'd told me, but things didn't quite work out the way that he'd have wanted. The sun was shining that day too, but it was cold, and Battersea Power Station was belching out smoke of its chimneys. My dad was standing there, watching me score my very first goal. We went off to the Chelsea match afterwards. They were playing against Preston North End, and Chelsea lost, but on that day I didn't mind, neither of us did. Happy as a lark I was, and so was my dad. He carried me all the way home on his shoulders. He never said much, he never did, but he was proud of me that day, and I know he was. One day, he said, one day, Billy, you could play for Chelsea. All you've got to do is work at it. And I believed him. That's what my dad did for me, and later on it was Ozzy, Mr. Osborne, from school. They gave me self-belief, and that counts for just about everything in this life. If you haven't got that, you haven't got anything, and I should know. Like that scrawny kid out there, I was a natural when it came to football. I had a lucky gift. For a start, I was nippy. I was always best out on the wing, the right wing. No one could catch me out there. I was faster than the kids twice my age, and somehow I could always make football do whatever I wanted it to. It just came easy to me. I don't know why, but it did. We always kept the special football up on the shelf in the kitchen, greased up so that it wouldn't crack. Dad had brought it back from France when he'd come home from the First World War. He'd found it out in the mud on the Somme, the only good thing that he ever brought back from that war. That's what he told me anyway. The trouble was that he'd brought something else home as well. He'd brought home gas in his lungs. I can remember his cough better than I remember his voice. Sometimes he'd be coughing his heart out all night long, and I'd lie there listening in the dark and crying because I could hear how much it was hurting him. I grew up knowing my dad a lot better than I knew my mother. He couldn't go out to work on account of his lungs, so we were together for a lot of the time. Mum would take in washing, and she'd be working all day, every day, and then she had my little brother Joe to look after as well. Dad and me, we played football for hours on end. in the street, in the park, in the back garden, anywhere. I was only allowed to use the special football at weekends, and even then we were only allowed to use it if it was dry. He didn't want it getting wet. So instead we'd play with a tennis ball. Dad said if I could do it with a tennis ball, then a real football would be easy peasy. Only a few days after I scored that first goal out there in the park, my dad died. Suddenly there was no more coughing in the house. Mum let me carry his football to the funeral. I held her hand the whole way through. For the first time, it was me holding her hand, not the other way round. We buried him in Putney churchyard, down by the river. It was a grey day, but he'd always loved the river. We'd often go feeding the ducks down there, then we'd sit and we'd watch the boats go chugging by, so it was just the right place for him, really. You've got to be in the right place when you die, that's what I think. I mean, you're there, you're going to be there for a long time, aren't you? I greased the football up when I got back home and I put it back up on the shelf in the kitchen, and that's where it stayed. I never kicked it again after that. I grew up quick after Dad died. We missed him, of course we did, but there wasn't time to get tragic about it. For a start, Mum had another baby on the way. There was little Joe to look after, and there was school to go to, and there was the washing to fetch and to carry for Mum. But every spare 5 minutes I'd be out back with my tennis ball, shooting or heading or trapping or dribbling, and I never missed a match day at Chelsea, not if I could help it. That was why I turned professional, well, sort of, at the age of 8 to pay for my ticket, but then I got caught. And that was how Ozzy came to be my coach, in a roundabout sort of way. Emmy had just been born. Mum needed every penny she could earn from taking and washing to keep us all fed and clothed, so I knew that I couldn't ask her for money. If I wanted to go to the match, I had to earn it somehow, or I had to steal it. Ozzy said it was stealing, but it wasn't, not really. It was a bet, but it was a bet that I knew I'd win, but a bet just the same. At break time, I'd dribble a tennis ball from one end of the school playground to the other, and there was a farthing in it for anyone who could take the ball off me. They had to come one at a time and there was no fouling, but a farthing to me if they couldn't get the ball. Now, they all knew I was good, but they all fancied their chances. 9 times out of 10 I'd manage it. I'd send them one way and then I'd go another, or I'd push it through their legs, or I'd dribble round the outside of them. It was easy pickings, and so I always had enough money for a ticket at the shed ends on Saturdays. I'd always gone in the shed end with Dad, right behind the goal, my favourite spot in the whole world. It still is. One morning, I was called out of lessons and I was sent straight to Ozzy's room. I could see straight away that he was none too pleased with me. He told me I was a gambling, good-for-nothing scallywag, and that it was as good as taking money out of other kids' pockets. He told me it was as good as stealing, he said, and he still wouldn't have stealing in his school. Then he told me to bend over. 3 whacks he gave me. It didn't hurt that much, not really. And afterwards, just as I was going out, he said, "Now that's over and done with, Billy, there's something I want to say to you. I've been watching you. You're young, but you're good enough to be in the school team, I think, already. More than that, I think one day you could be very good, maybe. But if you want to be the best, you've got to be more than a fancy dribbler. I can coach you if you like, I'll help you along a bit." And he did. He most certainly did. Ozzy took over when my dad had left off. 3-4 times a week, in all weathers, we'd be out practising, me and the rest of the school team, and Ozzy kept us at it. He'd lay his handkerchief down in front of the goal and we'd have to cross the ball from the wing so it landed spot on. And he'd run the legs off us too, tire us out. "Being clever isn't good enough, Billy," he'd tell me. "You've got to be tough with it." It was Ozzy that made me tough. It was Ozzy who taught me to think football, to know what was going on around me and on the other side of the pitch, and it was Ozzy who went to my mum and paid for my first pair of proper football boots. We hardly ever lost a match, and if I didn't score in every match, he'd want to know why. "You've got to be hungry, goal hungry," he'd say. Most of the other boys on the team were 11, and I was still only 8, but I wasn't too cocky about it. They made sure of that. They'd slap me down good and proper if I had any airs and graces. Besides, they liked having me there because I scored goals and I scored lots of them, and like me, they liked winning. I was a sort of lucky mascot for them. Billy the Kid, they called me. If we won 3 matches on the trot, Ozzy would take us all to see Chelsea and he'd pay for the lot of us. He may have whacked me from time to time, but Ozzy had a heart of gold, a real heart of gold. Now I'm sitting here and watching that bandy-legged kid out there. He's got it. He's really got it. Balance, ball control, grit. He's got the lot. just like Stanley Matthews, Jimmy Greaves, Georgie Best and Michael Owen. Head right over the ball, knows just what he's doing without even thinking about it. But he needs to look up more. He needs to look around him, know what's going on. He's not looking. I've got sausage rolls, just how I like them, crisp and flaky. I'll have one now to keep me going. They're lovely. Mum used to do sausages on Sundays, toad in the hole and bubble and squeak and gravy. I loved the sausages, loved the gravy. I loved her. My boots have got a bit muddy, and I polished them only this morning. That's the trouble with coming to the park. But still, who's looking? When we were young, my little brother Joe always scuffed his shoes at the toes, and he tore his trousers out at the knees. Mucky little chap he was, never wiped his nose or washed his face unless Mum made him. But he was always chirpy, big and healthy. He grew fast. By the time I was 14 and he was 12, he was already as big as me. More like a twin he was, and really good chums we were. Emmy was never well, not really. She had an awful cough and nearly died of it. Mum sat up with her night after night until she got better. She absolutely lived for us kids. She didn't spoil us, nothing like that. She could be strict enough if she had to be. But she fed us, she clothed us, she kept us warm. I don't think she ever had a thought for herself. She only ever had one luxury, which was lavender. She always smelt of lavender. Once a year we'd go down to the seaside for a week, and we'd stay at Broadstairs with her sister, our Auntie Mary. We loved it down there, the beach, the boats and the donkey rides. Emmy loved donkeys. She always wanted to bring one home with her, and she'd cry buckets when she couldn't. It was summer of 1935. I was 15, and we'd just got home from Broadstairs when Ozzy called at the house. He had something important to discuss with Mum, he told us. So she sat him down and gave him a cup of tea. He'd been talking to Mr. Knighton, the manager at Chelsea Football Club. It turned out that Ozzy was a Chelsea scout, and he'd recommended me to Mr. Knighton, and Mr. Knighton had seen me play, and would I sign forms for Chelsea? I'd be earning 12 and sixpence a week and all the football that I wanted to play. I'd be cleaning the players' boots, keeping the ground spick and span, but there'd be a place in the Chelsea side in a few years' time if it turned out that I was good enough. What did we think? I could have hugged him. Mum took it all very calmly. She sipped her tea and put her cup down slowly. Well, she said, it'll be up to Billy to decide, of course, but I think that sounds most acceptable. Most acceptable? She always had a way with words, did my mum, bless her. The very next day I kicked my first football at Chelsea Football Club, and I cleaned my first pair of boots too. I was like the cat that had got the cream. I couldn't believe my luck. None of my school chums had found work. There wasn't much about, not in those days, and here I was, being paid for what I loved doing best. There was a whole bunch of us lads who started on the ground staff at Chelsea that September, and all of us lived and breathed football. There was a lot of skivvying, but we didn't mind. None of us did, because the rest of the time we got to practice, and sometimes with our heroes too, the first team. Best of all was when Mills or Sam Weaver, the skipper he was, or Hanson would come and kick a ball about with us. I got a bit of a shock in the early days when I found there were others who were just as fast as me, stronger than me, and every bit as determined as I was as well. I was used to playing with bigger lads, of course, but these lads were good, and the trouble was, as the years passed, I didn't seem to be getting much bigger. Legs like sticks of celery. That's what Mr. Knighton, the manager, said, and he wasn't far wrong. I knew that if I was to have any hope at all, I had to build up my strength and my speed. So Ozzy would take me out for training in the park each evening when I got home. Joe would often come along too and practice with me. I could see how proud he was of me, and that made me want to practice all the harder. It was thanks to them, as much as anything, that I held my own at Chelsea despite my size, and by the time I was 17, I was selected for the Chelsea reserve side, on the right wing, where I belonged and where I was best. I hope you enjoyed the start of it. I will film the next part for the next video. Bye!